Hi, and welcome to Fire Tech Talk. I'm your host, Noah. Today we're here with Norb Makowka from NAFED to discuss fire extinguisher transportation and DOT regulations. Norb, thank you so much for joining us today. So let's get right into it. Why must FED employees have knowledge of Hazmat regulations and DOT regulations around hazmat?
It started right around 1990. That the United States Department of Transportation mandated a training program for anybody handling hazardous materials. It included fire extinguishers. As an industry, we used to work with the DOT all the time for the hydrostatic retesting of cylinders, and no one really even knew they were transportation, I should say no one. Most people didn't understand they were transportation regulations. The federal government came straight out with a mandate. Anyone who did transporting, filling, handling, testing, making anything to do with hazardous material had to undergo a very specific training program and regimen, and they spelled it out in their regulations, CFR 49. It started in 1992 that it was mandated for all large companies. The federal definition of a large company is 100 million, so that really didn't affect many of the distributors in our industry. So we had to complete our training by October of 93. So we started offering the train-to-trainer seminar program to try to bring people in compliance, because at that time, enforcement from DOT was very vigorous and people were being fined large amounts of money. So basically the reason is it's the law of the land and it's a hazardous material.
That's a great reason for it. So kind of feeding off of that, what does training look like when it comes to knowing how to perform hazmat functions properly?
It involves several things from the technician standpoint. The road technician, they have to realize that they're handling a cylinder of compressed gas. It's 100 PSI, it's 200 PSI. If they're into systems work, it can be 5,000 PSI. So safety is a main element. The whole putting it in your truck, how it's secured, the paperwork that's required depending on what you're doing. Different job positions have different requirements. The basic training element has to cover what are hazardous materials, why what you're handling is a hazardous material, and how it directly affects your operations and that of the entire company. When the DOT visits a facility that does hydrostatic retesting that has a number issued by the DOT, they look at more than the hydrostatic retesting. They verify that someone has trained all their employees, and they do it every 3 years, and they have proof of the training.
So training-related violations are top violations found by the DOT. Can you tell us about these violations and some common mistakes that have happened?
The easiest ones first to address would be for the hydrostatic retesters. DOT just published their 2017 penalty list. So for my training, I go through that entire list and pull out they tell you the company name, so anybody that had fire and safety, fire and equipment, we pull out the data, take the name off to protect the guilty and innocent, but describe what their violation was and the fine. The people with the RIN number, the requalifier identification number, their majority of their fine is uncalibrated testing equipment, bad record keeping, or improper record keeping. Just since I just did a training, those fines went from $1,000 to one was over $35,000. Yeah, so it varies. Now, the problem you have with their listing is they'll list all the violations and the total fine, but not a breakdown. So a lot of them have an element of failure to do reoccurring training, failure to do any training, failure to do what's called function-specific training. So they give you training very specific to what you do in your job. An interesting thing with the DOT with training, they have published what the maximum fine can be for any single wrongdoing, but there's no minimum fine. So you had a little mistake and everything else is good, they write you up, it's called a probable violation, it could be zero fine, unless it's training. There's a minimum $495 fine for training. If they really wanted to be strict with it, like this is your third violation for the same thing, they could give you that $495 or more per employee that missed training per every day they worked. Now, this hasn't happened, but that's why you got to tell people, if they caught you once, don't let them catch you making the same mistake. Right. The analogy I did is the regulations are thousands of pages. Consider yourself being audited by the IRS. You want to have what you need there, but never give more than they ask for.
Absolutely. Why is it important for FEDs to keep a record of hazmat training, testing, and certification for each employee?
Kind of what we talked before. It's a primary requirement of the hazardous material regulations is the training element. There's 4 areas you have to cover. One is a general awareness familiarization. You kind of just explain. They have hazardous materials from compressed gases, explosives, flammables, all the different ones. We deal with compressed gases, 99% of our hazardous material because a fire extinguisher is under pressure. You have to have a safety training element. And it has to include not only general safety awareness of, hey, you're handling a compressed gas cylinder. It can hurt people, it can kill people. But it's also, if your company has any safety policies, do you require safety glasses, steel-toed shoe? That all has to be covered. And other methods, safety-related, that's part of your company plan. What do you do if you got a heavy load? Do you let one guy struggle and try to get a 200-pound cylinder in a truck and then drop it and cause damage? So things like that. Third one is a security awareness training. It's the newest element that was added. It is a direct result of the terrorist attacks in the United States. And you've got to go through and you've got to stress security because you're transporting a hazardous material. It's the hardest element for me to do training, especially when it first came out, because you have to, as the trainer, you have to get a really nasty person's attitude. You almost have to give them examples. I'm the terrorist. I see your truck going to the airport every day. So I can kill your driver, get in your truck, go to the airport, cause damage, or refinery, or a chemical plant, a military establishment. What do you do to prevent it?
So what training is required to be able to transport fire extinguishers?
It has to be from the very basics. It's all those training elements, the safety, the general awareness, but you have to get the function-specific training. What is your job function? If you're the individual that does nothing but hydrostatically retest cylinders, you have to be trained very specifically in that function. If you're a field service technician, driving is part of your function, loading a truck, unloading a truck, if you do field recharge work, you do cylinder inspection. Depending on what you're shipping, you may require a very specific shipping paper type document. You have to know how to do that. You need emergency response information. Your company had to provide that. You have to make sure it's in the vehicle. It doesn't happen often, but if your vehicle is pulled over for a roadside inspection, whoever the enforcement agency is can ask to see your shipping documents and your emergency response information. And is your load properly secured? They could be a minor fine, if it's a state, a lot of times it's, a warning type ticket, but it could also be a cash ticket.
So does hazmat training have to be retaken once an interval or time has passed?
Yeah, basic requirement, you're a new employee. You have 90 days to go through all that hazmat training. Okay. During the 90 days, you can work, but it has to be under direct supervision of someone who's experienced and has already gone through the training and has the certification record of training. After that, it has to be repeated every 3 years. Or if you would change job functions. Say you're a shop technician, you get hired in, a lot of distributors, the technician starts in the shop. So he's recharging fire extinguishers, maybe doing hydrostatic retesting, so he needs function-specific training for that. He's doing very well, so a promotion is to get a route. Sure. So now he's going to go in a truck. You have to include the additional training, from basic driver training to the proper loading, unloading, documentation, and things along those lines for the truck. I always try to tell at these training, they look at me when you say you have to give them driver training. And I says, think about your new employee. I says, if it's someone really young and they pull into your parking lot in a nice sports car, screech up and get out, and now you're going to throw them in your company van or boxcar, everything changes, acceleration, braking, center of gravity. Right. There's a lot of different requirements. And in 3 years, ride with the guy. You've trained him once. 3-year recertification is I think it's a good idea. Because you have to have a test involved, and I always say it doesn't have to be a written test, it can be practical. You can get your technicians and say, okay, you guys show me how you load the truck, you show me how you do the shipping paper, you show me how you test. And it can all be part of it and rewound into it. And it's a good thing because not that people do things wrong, you do the same thing for 3 years, you might miss a step, and to you it's normal. So it helps refresh everybody on there.
Absolutely. Well, Norb, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you guys for all tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe for more FireTech talks just like this one, and we'll see you next time.